Hey, everybody, it's Greg again. It's another edition of Unbreakable, the podcast. It is Tuesday, June the 17th. We're starting off with a song we're doing Remember When? We're going to talk 60s, 70s, 80s. Listen to this, an 80s classic by Rick Astley. Not ass as in behind, Rick Astley. This is typical 80s music. A lot of synthesizers, drum machines. That was the 80s for you. Never gonna give you up. That you did. The reason why I'm playing this song is this song just passed 1 billion billion with the B streams. People have asked for this song over 1 billion times. It's very catchy, isn't it? That was the 80s. When I think 80s music, it was one of my favorite decades for music. You had Michael Jackson with the Thriller album. You had Prince, Running Wild, the Purple Rain. You had Lionel Richie out there. He had a great album called Can't Slow Down. You had the rise of female singers. Madonna was very hot back in the 80s. Whitney Houston, the voice herself. Cyndi Lauper was great. Aretha Franklin, even though Aretha gives me that. Tina Turner, Private Dancer. Just great music. Great music. That was Live Aid, the big concert that was held in London and Philly, 1985. Can you believe it? This year will be 40 years since Live Aid. Probably the last big fundraiser concert of all time. Do it, Rick Astley. Do it. Yes. But it was just a fun decade to live through. And we do these Remember When segments maybe once a week, because it's good. It's a lot of fun. For people who have lived through the 60s, 70s, and 80s as I did, and survived, it sparks a memory. And for you whippersnappers out there who weren't lucky enough to live through that time, yeah, it just gives you a little tutorial of what life was like back then, The 80s were a lot of fun. Big hair, big TV shows, big movies, just fun stuff. Now, coming off the 60s, which was very turbulent with the Kennedy assassinations and Martin Luther King and the Vietnam War, it's so much uncertainty about the 60s. You had the Beatles, you had like great stuff about the 60s, but then you also had the hippie movement. People were getting into LSD, drugs back then. What the hell was that? Anyway, it was the 80s were a fun time to be alive, because the 60s sort of blended into the 70s, if you remember. And the 70s, for all its quirkiness, that's a good, that's a good description of the 70s. Quirky. Because you had the music. You had more rock music come into being. But then at the end of the decade, you had disco. And the Bee Gees, as great as they were really the ones who brought disco upon us. And it was okay for a while, but then after a while, it got to be really lame, and people were burning their disco records, and it was just hell of a time to be alive. Those few years. Saturday Night Fever was great. Travolta was great. But after a while, it sort of wore on me, And so then we went back to pop music and rock music in the 80s. And all of a sudden, we had Michael Jackson and Prince come upon us, in the time. So but that's something here. Let me bring it up again. Uh, Fun facts in the 70s. Listen. So as we said, here it is. Do you remember that the first Earth Day occurred in 1970? And here we are, good 55 years later, we're still celebrating Earth Day in April. Video games started coming into being. Pong, remember Pong? Or these dogs remember Pong. The dogs weren't even alive to play Pong back then. But do you remember Pong? The TV screen? And it was like ping pong, right? Back and forth. You had they only went north and south. Then you hit it, then you try to bounce it off the screen. To us, that was high tech entertainment. And then you had more things like Pac-Man came into being, and Frogger and Frogger. And it really started to boom. I wish I would have been had hindsight back then of how big video games would be in the future. But they're still big now. I would have bought stock in video games or something. I would have been a rich little dude. Yeah. But who knew? But the 70s, oh my God, and then you had, well, the Vietnam War ended in the 70s. Thank God for that. I remember the day it ended. There was celebration all over the country. And it was such a tough time. There was a lot of those soldiers never came back, And the ones who did come back suffered from PTSD, and it was just a bad time, And then you had Nixon and Watergate, and I don't know, fashion was just off the charts. Mini skirts. Well, that's going back to the 60s. Sakatumi, like the laughing, and they all wore mini skirts for the woman, and hookah shells, necklaces, and then you had the hot pants in the 70s. That was a nice fashion trend. But for the guys, we started moving away from suits. We started getting into things like vests. Vests were very big in the 70s. As I had told you before, leisure suits. Oh my God, I used to have like a rainbow full of leisure suits in my freaking closet over here. All colors, all pastel colors. Baby blue, lavender, yellow, pink, anything you want with guys, That was the decade too. If you remember, the 70s, guys were actually getting homes. They did. I had, I'm looking back at it now, I was wrong shaped. But that was the style back then, Guys had perms. I think back on what a time, the music, everything, the fashion, everything was just changing. And I think it changed for the better in the 80s. I really do. Because the 70s and the 60s were just so out there. Like I said before, quirky. Quirky is the word for those 2 decades. But let me see what else here. They noted in the 70s. Yeah, technologies just boomed. I mean, the microwave oven came into being. Remember that? We thought the microwave was like really hot stuff. Get it? Hot stuff. But the technology just boomed. On a personal note, because of my bone condition, I wasn't able to attend high school back in the 70s. And so what they did was they hooked up an intercom box from my bedroom to the classroom at the local high school. And that was like big time technology. You press a button and you could talk to the class. And you could hear everything that was going on. You couldn't see anything. Nowadays, if you had to stay in, because it would be more like Zoom, so you could see stuff, you know. But back in the day, you couldn't. That technology did not exist. The first email was sent in 1970. Now, we didn't have personal computers back then. Very few of us did. Only the rich had personal computers. Only like scientists and computer programmers, they had personal computers. Well, we peons like me, I didn't get my first PC until like the mid 90s. And my first server was like AOL. Remember that? You've got mail. Yeah, that was me. But computer technology, it it just burst upon the scene in the 90s, where everybody all of a sudden had a personal computer at home. But it really didn't just come onto the scene. This technology was being planned and was being invented well into, from the 70s on. And it took about 20 years until they perfected it well enough that you and I could have a personal computer in our home. And actually, uh, there was no internet until the mid 90s. So you couldn't go on, there was no Amazon. And, you know, in a way, it's kind of too easy now. You go on Amazon and buy just about anything, right? But back in the day, you had to go to a mall or to a store, what they call a brick and mortar place, to buy your stuff. You know? And I think in a lot of ways, even though things are very much more convenient now, where you could shop online at 3 o'clock in the morning in the news. Not that I have, but but you know what I'm saying? It's much more convenient now. But back in the day, you actually had to get off the couch and go to the mall. And I thought that was a lot of fun. You know, there was nothing like Christmas shopping at the mall with all the music and the decorations and everything. And it's a shame that a lot of people have gotten away from that just because of convenience and because it's just faster and easier. Things are actually delivered to your house, you know? But back in the day, it's hard to believe, maybe only 30 years ago, which isn't that long time, uh, the internet did not exist. So what else in the 70s? Oh, Jimmy Carter. You know what? I love Jimmy Carter. He was a hell of a man, but he wasn't a very good president. I think, you know, he got into a lot of stuff because the Ayatollah, I mean, how appropriate is that with everything going on in Iran now? Back in around 1980, uh, the Ayatollah, they captured some of our Americans and held them hostage until Reagan took over and then they released them. But poor Jimmy Carter, he was like under a barrel all the time because he had the hostages to worry about. Then he had gas prices. If you lived through that time, do you remember gas prices we thought were spiky, like $1 a gallon? We thought that's a lot to pay, you know. But there was a gas shortage back then too. People would line up for miles just to get to fill their tanks. It was amazing. Um, See, I had stuff like that going, you know? Like I said, it was a fun decade to live through, but there's still a lot of uncertainty in the world, like the culture. Oh yes, Rocky, some of my friends Sylvester Stallone, Adrian, hey. Roots, do you remember Roots, the miniseries? Oh my God, that was like the first great miniseries of all time. And everybody watched Roots. That was a 70s thing, you know? What else? Uh, Well, we had a lot of things going. Yeah, we had the Earth Day and all kinds of cool stuff going on. Music. I mean, music was a lot of bubblegum music back in the 70s. You had early 70s, a lot of singer-songwriters. John Denver, Jim Croce, Gordon Lightfoot, you name it. And then as the decade proceeded, we had a lot of more rock music. Remember Kiss, and Aerosmith, and a lot of big, what they call stadium acts, because that's when they started. Like the Rolling Stones every year would have a tour, and in the 70s, they would play the big arenas, the big football stadiums. 100,000 people, you would cram into the football stadium, and the Rolling Stones would be playing there, and they would always have 2 or 3 acts with them. Like the Steve Miller Band would come and open for the Rolling Stones, or Journey with Steve Perry. They would open for the Rolling Stones. So it was just, music was just fun. And then, like I said, when you get into the late 70s, we got into disco. And it was okay for a while, but it kind of drug on you. And the Bee Gees, as great as they are, if you don't know the Bee Gees, my friends, especially people who were born, let's say, after 2000, maybe you're now in your 20s or you're in your teenage years, look up the Bee Gees. They were great. And the thing about the Bee Gees was they reinvented themselves all the time. When they first hit the scene in the 60s, they had these mellow ballads, to love somebody, the way I love you, uh, kind of soul music, white soul music. Great harmonies, like reminiscent of the Beatles or the Beach Boys, right? Great harmonies. Um, but then their older stuff, they just didn't have following anymore. And then Robert Stigwood, who was this big producer back in the 70s, and he was the Bee Gees manager for the time. He's, boys, if you want to get back on the charts, you have to reinvent yourself. Listen to the radio and listen what's out there. They did. So the Bee Gees got together, all 3 of their brothers, and by then they were living in Miami Beach. And as they said, what they would do is they'd be on the beach all freaking day. At night, they would all convene and start writing songs together into the wee hours of the night. Get up the next morning, back on the beach all day, getting some sun. At nighttime, back into the studio. Bee Gees reinvented themselves, and really the who you could thank for that is Barry Gibb, who's still alive. He's the only Bee Gee still alive. Can you imagine that? He was the oldest brother, and his younger brothers died before him. How sad, huh? Bee Gees lived in Miami, and in order to get from the beach to where they lived in the studio where they recorded, you had to go over a bridge over the Biscayne Bay. And the bridge, when you went over it with a car or limousine, it made this bumping sound. Barry Gibb picked up on that rhythm and said, wait a minute, hear that rhythm. Took it into the studio, got it down on tape, and that's how the song Jive Talking came to be. In many, many ways, Jive Talking was the very first disco song. And originally, the Bee Gees wanted to call it Drive Talking, drive talking. Da, da, da. They switched it to jive talking. I mean, these guys were from England, Australia. They didn't know. Sting would have to say, what is jive? He said, jive. They thought jive was like a dance or something. He said, no, no, no. Jive is sort of like, it's like a culture thing, you know? The way you speak, the way you act. Um, so the Bee Gees wrote Jive Talking, and it was really like the first disco song at all. And after that, they just took off. All the clubs started playing their music. They did the soundtrack to Saturday Night Fever, and the rest is history. But if you ever want to look up a really good group, Google or Zoom the Bee Gees, and find how great they were. Um, so, 60s. 60s were a very simple time. Were they for you too? I mean, you had to worry though, because if you were healthy, you could be drafted and you were sent to Vietnam. That was scary as shit. Oh my God. Just think about it, my friends. Your fate was in the hands of other people. Those little ping pong ball that came up. If your birthday came up, let's say you were born on November 16th with me. If your birthday came up around the beginning of the lottery, they called it the lottery, the draft lottery, uh, your number was called. You had to report whether you liked it or not. And so you would look at the list and be drafted into the Army, the Navy, or the Marines. And chances are you might get sent to Vietnam with that. So it was just such a turbulent time. And then you had the hippies, remember the hippies? Especially in California, San Francisco. Uh, remember that song? Are you going to San Francisco? Be sure to wear flowers in your hair. Oh, they're coming to take me away. Uh-huh. Anyway, that's uh, just a wild, just wild. Just look back on. I'll tell. Um, but we'll talk more 70s, 60s, and 80s as time goes on. Uh, I wanted to brush on Rick Astley, especially since that song went over 1 million streams. Oh, and he also did that other good song. Um, never, the one you listen to, Never Gonna Give You Up, Never Gonna Let You Down. He did a lot of great musical movies too. Together forever and ever, but together forever. Catchy stuff. And he's still alive. He's still touring. So if he ever comes to America, check him out. Rick Astley. Check him out. I guess that's about it, huh? I guess that's it. Phillies won last night. They're kicking ass down in Florida. They're getting ready. Only 2 games behind the stinking New York Mets, who they face this weekend. First time the Mets are back at Citizens Bank Park since last year in the playoffs when the Mets knocked the Phillies on. Phillies revenge, my friend. Phillies revenge. This weekend, I'm very happy to be going to the game Saturday night, so I can't wait. Um, so everybody have a great day. Take care. Thanks for watching me and listening to me. Thanks for putting up with me. I hope the show brought back a lot of memories. The last time I did a Remember When show, I actually had 78 people join me in the show, which is great. So I'm thinking maybe nostalgia is really good. Maybe people want to kind of relive the past a little bit, you know? And again, the newcomers out there, there's a fascination about the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And you know what? Even though I'm an older dude, I was very lucky and very blessed and very proud to have lived through those decades. And I tell you what, it's nothing like experience, right? Seasoned old vet. I'll be back again soon. We'll talk more 60s, 70s, and 80s on Remember When. And we'll have our visual show too, where we just gab about things in the news, talk about whatever, right? So, everybody have a great day. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to me. And I'll see you again soon, okay? Everybody take care. Bye.